Groundswell Consortium. We've got 3 speakers with us from Mae Murray Foundation in Northern Ireland and also from University of Exeter in England. What I'm going to do is just give a very brief overview about Groundswell for a few minutes for those who maybe aren't familiar with the consortium and the work that we're doing, and share some links for you to find some information, because we've got some people joining us for the first time. Screen on. So Groundswell Consortium brings together 9 different universities across the UK, communities particularly based in Belfast, Edinburgh and Liverpool, and policymakers and a range of other stakeholders. And our main aim is around applying different methods really to optimise the health impact and also planetary health impact of urban green and blue spaces, so our parks, rivers, canals, forests, etc. We have these kind of core themes around co-production, so very much working with our partners and other stakeholders and communities and local groups in terms of developing different interventions and policies. We have a core focus around health and particularly chronic disease prevention, and also in reducing inequalities in terms of health inequalities, social and environmental inequalities. We talk particularly around system science and complexity, so really taking that from the perspective that these aren't particularly easy problems to solve, and it takes a range of different perspectives and voices and stakeholders working together on these issues. And we very much work around this cycle of kind of research, policy, implementation and active citizenship, where we have a sharing of knowledge across the work that we do. I just set this up, and you'll have seen the web link in the last slide that I'll bring up, but this is to show a range of different outputs that Niamh and Ellie and Emma and others in the consortium, who are our science communication and impact officers, are responsible for, so you can keep in touch and keep up to date with a lot of the work that we're doing through our website, through various publications, blogs, community journalism, and other reports, etc. And you'll find those, say, in our website, and also on Twitter and well, now more so X. So we've got until 3:30 today to talk about inclusive urban green and blue spaces. We're going to have 2 15 to 20 minute presentations from Kyleigh and Sarah, which is then followed by some discussion led by Alix, and then we'll have an opportunity for some Q&A with the audience as well. You'll see, if you look at the bottom of your computer screen, you'll see a Q&A function, so we'll encourage you to use that and put your questions to the speakers or points for discussion in the Q&A function. We'll just go from presentation to presentation, and we'll hold the various questions until the end, but we'll try and answer some of those questions as we go along as well. So I'm delighted to be joined by Kyleigh Lough and Alix Crawford from the Mae Murray Foundation, and also Dr. Sarah Bell from the University of Exeter. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand over to Kyleigh, who's the Chief Executive of the Mae Murray Foundation, to share her screen and give her presentation. So Kyleigh, over to you.
Great, please bear with me 2 seconds just to share my screen. Of course, it's frozen on an awful frame shot of myself. There we go. Okay, so my name is Kyleigh Lough, Chief Executive of Mae Murray Foundation, and today I'm going to talk to you about Adapt My Beach, a resource that we have just created this year. Please note that the slides and the full Adapt My Beach document will be sent to you via email after the presentation, so there's no need really to take any extensive notes, and I'll be delighted to take any questions afterwards. So the origins of Mae Murray Foundation are rooted in the birth of Talia McDowell, who you can see in the pictures. She is the daughter of our chairperson and founder, Alix Crawford. Born in 1999 and diagnosed with quadriplegic cerebral palsy, both Talia and Alix found themselves socially excluded and isolated as a result of Talia's complex needs. Determined to make a difference to others facing the same barriers, Alix established Mae Murray Foundation in 2016. Named after her late mother, Mae Murray, who embodied a positive, can-do attitude and a passionate commitment to inclusivity. The charity started out with just 20 families. Today we have over 1,500 families and support over 6,000 people every year. Clear evidence of the need and the positive impact of our work. We are a lived experience, membership-led organisation, which makes it possible for people of all ages and abilities to experience the world together, to take part in activities and build friendships and environments which are genuinely inclusive. We run a comprehensive range of innovative and inclusive projects for children, teenagers and adults. These range from outdoor activities to music and social events and equipment loan schemes for people of all ages. Crucially, we draw on members' lived experience to co-design and implement permanent solutions in everyday environments, just like the beach. Our vision is of a society where everyone can take part, where everyone's included. And our mission is to improve quality of life through increasing participation of all abilities together. And you can see here our values are to listen, include, partner, influence, and deliver. So I'm going to get into inclusive beaches, and you might ask, what is an inclusive beach? In 2016, we brought a group of 30 young people to the beach for the first time. At this time, we had just one beach wheelchair, and it was a typical July day. It poured. The rain was horrid, and all the young people waited for their 15-minute slot on this chair. And this one young lady came out of the sea, having been into the water for the first time in her life. And she said to me, "Kyleigh, do you know that the sea is salty?" And you shouldn't get to the age of 17 without realising that the salty taste of the water. So the term inclusive beach has been coined by Mae Murray Foundation to describe a beach environment that has been carefully planned so that people of all ages and abilities can take part, have fun and be included. Looking around an inclusive beach, you will see people of all ages and abilities taking part together. From beach cleaning to surfing, school trips, community festivals, diversity will be visible. Creating a successful inclusive beach is a long-term evolving process. It is essential to keep the inclusive beach under constant review, seeking the views of all those who use it and those who don't, and making positive steps to remove any of the barriers to participation. And this is a video that kind of gives a much better illustration of what an inclusive beach is.
The term inclusive beach was adopted by Mae Murray Foundation to describe a beach environment which has been carefully planned so that people of all ages and abilities can take part, have fun and be included. I never came to the beach, stood by the old. No one should find themselves left out or facing barriers when a beach is truly inclusive. At an inclusive beach, visitors will be confident that they will have a stress-free arrival with appropriate parking or drop-off points. They will be able to move between the beach, eateries and public amenities. Amenities which offer dignified toileting for all. Visitors will be able to borrow beach mobility equipment and enjoy activities suited to a wide and varied range of need. Looking around an inclusive beach, you will see people of all ages and abilities taking part together. from beach cleaning to surfing, school trips to community festivals. Diversity will be visible.
An inclusive beach is important to me because I'm able to have family days out with my family without worrying how am I going to get down on the beach. Just being able to have a walk along the beach with my wee cousins or my mum or my sister is just really, really good. I feel like I'm a part of it rather than just sitting up watching them on the tarmac. I feel like I'm more independent. I'm able to go out and walk on my own with friends rather than having to bring my mum along.
The ownership or stewardship of beaches often lies with a local authority or other organisation, like the National Trust. Mae Murray Foundation has worked collaboratively with beach operators in Northern Ireland to create inclusive beaches which are more easily managed and sustained.
Because, as I've said before, it's not the zeal person that is really disabled, it's the environment that disables them. So Mae Murray is helping the environment and to be more inclusive and have things like these beach chairs which you can hire on the Mae Murray website. And they just allow Zero people to have a great time just like anyone else would.
It is essential to keep any inclusive beach under constant review, seeking the views of all those who use it and those who don't, so that positive steps can be taken to remove any barriers to participation which emerge.
Next to you. I come up to the North Coast often. It's great to be able to hire these chairs for free of charge and to be able to enjoy the beach and the sea with my friends. In Malibu.
So the Mae Murray Foundation now have 5 inclusive beaches across Northern Ireland. This summer, over 2,000 people took part at the beach who wouldn't have been able to do so without this project. And 88% of these people told us that being able to take part at the beach improved their mental and physical well-being. Mae Murray Foundation is determined to support others to create more genuinely inclusive spaces in everyday environments like beaches, gyms, play areas and public events, where people of all ages and abilities can enjoy time together. To that end, Mae Murray Foundation's membership, with all its lived experience, has co-produced and developed the ADAPT framework to underpin and guide the process of making spaces genuinely inclusive. Our first priority was the ADAPT framework was to apply it to the beach environment. The focus of this guide is to support others to create, manage, sustain and improve inclusive beaches, both in Northern Ireland and further afield, so that more people of all ages and abilities can enjoy a day at the beach together. I will now give you an overview of how the ADAPT framework has been applied to the beach. However, the guide provides much more detail on each aspect. So again, this is just an overview. So the A in ADAPT stands for access. Inclusive beach design must consider access and connectivity across the entire location, as well as the visitor journey. Visitors should be able to move from point of arrival to the sand, cafe, toilet, and equipment loan scheme storage point safely and confidently. Pathways, ramps, terrain, handrails, parking should all be compliant with local regulations. The D in ADAPT stands for dignity. A lack of appropriate toileting facilities is a common barrier and denies many the most basic of human rights. Remember that excluding one member of the family often excludes the entire group. Dignity for all is paramount and is a key component of our inclusive beach model. Refreshing and refueling are basic human needs, and inclusive beach facilities need to provide appropriate facilities for all ages and abilities. A beach is only genuinely inclusive if it has both standard disabled toilets and a change in places toilet. The change in places toilet has additional space and has a hoist and adult sized changing bench within. So the next A stands for all ability. An inclusive beach must be open to all abilities and all ages to take part. How can everyone be included in beach activities such as a walk on the beach or a swim in the sea? We operate a loan scheme at our beaches, offering specialist beach mobility equipment such as beach wheelchairs, floating wheelchairs, and beach walkers. These support people to access and enjoy the beach. We operate these loan schemes in partnership with the beach operator. Beach equipment loan schemes can be complex to operate, and more tools and templates are available within the guide. And the P in ADAPT stands for participation. Gaining access to the beach environment is just the start of the journey to taking part within society. Events and activities held at inclusive beaches help to break down barriers to participation, reduce isolation, and improve physical and mental well-being. Inclusive events also empower beach visitors to learn new skills, push boundaries, and achieve alongside the rest of the community. And here you can see some lovely pictures of our members enjoying surfing, one of our most popular activities in the summer. And finally, the T in ADAPT stands for transformation. Changing the infrastructure so that people can access the beach and participate in activities together is key, but more work is needed. Our lived experience tells us that negative attitudes, a shortage of joined up services, and poor planning create further barriers. Our guide provides some suggestions on how to transform attitudes and create sustainable change at the beach environment. So, within our guide, we have a 10-step guide as to how to create an inclusive beach. And I'm simply going to give an overview of these because they're actually very detailed, and you will need to read the full guide to understand them all. But the first step is that the guide provides a tool to help assess the beach site for suitability. Step 2 then is to think about your budget, and the guide will talk about the capital, equipment, and operational costs that need to be considered. Step 3, our model is based on partnership with beach operators. The guide details how we split the responsibilities. And you will have heard earlier on that the video talks about beach operators. Here in Northern Ireland, most beaches are owned by either council or national trust. And therefore we partner, our whole approach is based on that partnership. As a small charity, we wouldn't be able to do it on our own. Step 4, in our experience, it is challenging to operate an inclusive beach without staff. The guide details more information on the roles that may be helpful. Step 5 then, we have created a training guide. This is reviewed annually and we use this to train beach operator staff. Step 6 is to put an online pre-booking system in place. No one wants to go through all of the hassle of getting ready for a day at the beach to get there and for there to be no equipment available. So this online booking system ensures that people can pre-book and their day is fully planned. Step 7 then is we have included a full copy of our risk management plan. Risk management is one of the top queries that we get from other organisations wanting to know about our risk assessment. You know, if you're bringing a beach chair into the water, there's obviously a lot of things that need to be considered and risks that need to be mitigated. Our risk management plan goes through all of these risks and tells you the details of how we have mitigated each one. Step 8 considers the ongoing servicing and maintenance needs and the expertise required. Step 9 then is the most important aspect of an inclusive beach is that it's constantly kept under review. It is essential to gather feedback and understand new needs as they emerge and to develop solutions to any new barriers that have been identified. Likewise, this guide will be reviewed and updated with any new learning. Finally then, step 10 lays out the responsibilities that need to be considered throughout the year, as well as some useful templates to help manage an inclusive beach. A question that we get asked all of the time: can every beach be an inclusive beach? It's important to state that not every beach will be suitable for the creation of an inclusive beach, and this may be due to factors such as challenging sand and rock movement, inability to provide parking and toilet facilities, or perhaps site development that may be restricted by environmental or planning regulations. There are many stakeholders who have contributed to the development of inclusive beaches and this guide. We often work in partnership with others, bringing together as much knowledge and expertise to ensure an inclusive and safe experience for our members. If you have an interest or expertise in inclusive beaches, beach activity, or water safety, we encourage you to sign up to join our inclusive beach stakeholder community. Meetings will only take place every 6 months, but it's really useful to have a community to call upon when needed. An invitation to join this community will be sent out via email after the presentations. So this has been a really quick overview of Adapt My Beach, and you will find a link to the full document via email after the presentation. Please contact us if you have any feedback on the guide or have any questions, and I'd like to thank you all for your time this afternoon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kyleigh. A really nice overview of what exactly an inclusive beach is. I thought the video was brilliant, just to really bring it to life and illustrate all the various different aspects that make up an inclusive beach. And we've been really privileged to work with yourself and others at the Mae Murray Foundation over the last kind of 6 to 12 months on some of this work, and it was brilliant to have some of the researchers from Groundswell and other projects get out and volunteer over the summer and really experience it as well. So thank you for all those opportunities. It's been say a real privilege to work with the Mae Murray Foundation. Okay. So thank you for that. I encourage you, we've got some questions coming in, which is brilliant. So we'll pick those up at the end. So thank you, Kyleigh. We'll move on then to our next presentation, which is Dr. Sarah Bell from University of Exeter, who's going to talk to us about green spaces. So Sarah, can I hand over to you?
Yes, great. And I just wanted to echo that video was brilliant. There's at least 1 star in the making in there. I'll just share these. Well, hopefully that is working. I'll presume yes. Hi, yes, I'm Sarah, and I'm really excited to be part of this webinar. So thank you for having me. Just briefly by way of background, I'm a senior lecturer in health geography at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health at the University of Exeter, and we're based down in Cornwall in Penryn. So the idea of inclusive beaches is very relevant to the beaches down here. Lots of them could do with I think learning from some of that guidance. Most of my research over the last 12 years or so has explored experiences of health, well-being and disability with nature. And by nature, I'm interpreting that in its broadest sense, from the weather we come across when we move outside, to the sounds and scents of different plants and creatures, and also specific types of settings like gardens, parks, woodlands, coast, countryside, and so on. And today I'm going to draw on some of that work to reflect on why it's essential to embed, but also look beyond ramps and handrails and proximity when trying to understand how to unlock nature's landscapes to meet a diversity of priorities, interests, and needs. And I'd like to start with a quote from a sight-impaired participant who took part in a project that I ran from 2016 to 2018 called Sensing Nature. And the participant said, "I think nature has become more important to me in some ways now that I find it harder to get to, because it's unnecessary that it's harder to get to. So it feels like an unnecessary separation and an unfair separation. It's like it should be more important to get us out into the wilderness because we know that it's beneficial for health and happiness. So it should be more important that we get there. And yet you know that it's not. And that's really frustrating because I know that I will feel better when I get outside, but it's just difficult to get outside sometimes. And I put wilderness in quotation marks because she went on to explain how previously, before her sight really changed, the wilderness was somewhere she associated with distant, remote landscapes, whereas now sometimes even just stepping outside of the front door can feel like embarking on a wilderness expedition. And I've highlighted this quote because it emphasizes compromised access to nature, whether it's a beach or green spaces, as a social justice issue. It's an unfair separation, and that's why this type of work is so important. So by way of very brief background, Sensing Nature was a study that was funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, and it involved in-depth qualitative research exploring how people with sight impairment living in rural and urban areas of England describe their experiences with and within diverse types of nature. And we produced a whole range of practical outputs, and I put some of them on the screen there. But if you would like to procrastinate and kill some time at some point, then feel free to visit the project website. They're all on there as well in various formats, and that's www.sensing-nature.com. Now, drawing on this project and some of the work undertaken since, I'm going to do a bit of a whistle-stop tour in this talk of some of the key dimensions of access to be considered when seeking to enable inclusive nature experiences. And obviously, some of these have already been touched on, so I won't dwell on those for too long. But I also just want to say a big thank you to Stuart at the Sensory Trust for producing these graphics for an inclusive design guide that we wrote back in 2018. So I'm going to take each access dimension in turn, although in practice there is overlap between them. So thinking about physical access, people often try to understand likely use of nature through measuring physical proximity to a space, which is important, but beyond proximity, it's also important to understand whether people can physically reach the nature setting in question, which was obviously a key part of that ADAPT framework. If it's nearby, are there safe path networks for people to get there? If it's further afield, how can people get there, especially those without access to private transport? And if someone can get there, can they explore and experience the space fully? How is this supported by the physical fabric of the setting? You know, nature is often uneven, it's unpredictable, it's changeable. So physical access really demands attention to things like the ease of navigation from the entrance onwards, the scale and the layout, the quality of the path networks, site maintenance. How well does a space weather? Do you suddenly get drainage issues in winter? Are there trip hazards that appear or branches that you suddenly end up walking into on a main route through the space? And what's the presence of key facilities? And not just the presence, but also the distribution. Perhaps you have an accessible bathroom or a changing place, but it's just at the entrance of a really expansive environment. So people can't really stray that far away from it because there's not more accessible facilities further in. Obviously, that's not always possible, but it's just worth thinking about that presence and distribution. And it's also worth recognizing that sometimes there is a lack of willingness to change the physical fabric of a setting, especially in historically or ecologically preserved or protected environments. And it's worth thinking about at what point those protections can come into tension with opportunities to maximize their inclusive potential. So disability advocate and scholar, Professor Alison Kafer, makes the important point that in many ways, the reluctance to make access adjustments reflects an act of ableist forgetting, a willingness to imprint steps but not ramps, for example. And to read an extract from her work here, she says, non-disabled access is made invisible, while disabled access is made hypervisible. Steps are themselves an accommodation, just one made for a different kind of body. Those who protest the development of accessible trails and services consistently use the language of protection in making their claims. In their view, increasing disability access and protecting the environment are irreconcilable. But the fact that it's often only disability access that comes under such interrogation suggests an act of ableist forgetting. That doesn't mean that every single trail will accommodate every single body. There will be terrain too rocky or too steep for some bodies and modalities. But this is true for all bodies, disabled and non-disabled. What shifts in this view is that trails are no longer designed for only one single body, and that decisions about trails are recognised as decisions, ones that can be changed, extended, modified. And there's lots more that could be said about that, but I'm mindful of time, so I'll move on to sensory access now. So thinking about sensory access, if people can be physically present in a site, can they engage in a rich quality of experiences in situ? Can they share those experiences with others? I think that came through really strongly in the Adapt My Beach framework. And can people prepare for potentially unfamiliar sensory experiences prior to a visit? So I'm just going to look at those three aspects in a little bit more detail again now. Efforts to promote sensory access have not always been fully thought through. This is apparent, for example, in the context of the sensory garden. So whilst efforts to think about people's sensory experiences are appreciated, a number of the participants who took part in Sensing Nature explained that a focus on sensory gardens as a sole access solution within much more expansive nature settings was a missed opportunity. A bit like somebody having to stay on the tarmac whilst their family and friends are on the sand and splashing about in the water at the beach. Sensory gardens tend to privilege relatively simple forms of nature contact, whether it's through passive touch, hearing, or smell, which can be brilliant, but sometimes it's at the expense of more expansive, exploratory, multisensory experiences that can nurture that sense of dimension and scale and orientation, that can spark curiosity and support people to move freely and safely in and with nature, catering for that kinesthetic sense too. And many participants explained how being limited to short sensory trails or small sensory gardens in these more expansive environments inadvertently created segregated experiences, treating them first and foremost as people with impairment, rather than people with an interest in nature's varied forms and habitats, and sometimes closing down opportunities to explore, to develop new skills, to feel a sense of freedom, and to share nature experiences fully with loved ones. And there are examples out there demonstrating other approaches to this. I think we've already heard one today, but just to give another couple of examples, the Wild Way Kermiter Trail in the Eifel National Park in Germany was one that I came across. It's a 6.2 kilometre accessible trail that takes in a range of sensory-rich environments, and it's directly in the heart of the ecological park on the Kermiter Ridge. So it's not on the edge, it's in the heart of it. And the trail encompasses a barrier-free network of paths, boardwalks, and panoramic views of the lakelands, wending through mixed woodland containing native red beaches with regular benches, wheelchair-friendly picnic tables, and lots of interactive information stations. And those approaches to orientation and interpretation have been thought through carefully. There's a tactile guidance system, there's large raised type signage, there's German Braille, and there's audio information, for example. Just to give another example, which some of you may have come across, Potter and Ponder is an initiative that was done at the National Trust Croom site in Worcestershire in the UK. And this Potter and Ponder sensory map was co-produced with children with learning difficulties from local schools and an artist, William Haincombe, who's from Outside In, which is an organisation which provides a platform for artists who experience disabling barriers to the art world. And the map on the screen there reflects these moments of sensory joy that unfolded across the parkland, as highlighted by the 35 children who took part. So teachers from the children's schools used a whole variety of communication tools and translation methods to ensure that all the children were clearly making their sensory choices, whether it's through tracking smiles, eye movements, gestures, dwell time, for example. And the artist, William, visited Croom's sensory sites and he created illustrations to represent the selected moments. And William's illustrations have been placed on Croom's site map. So in this way, the children's experiences are now informing lots of people's experiences on site, guiding visitors to discover and share in those moments of sensory joy, and actually creating new Makaton symbols that didn't exist before to be able to share and communicate those new sensory experiences as well. I think the light and shade one was new. Now, sensory access is not just something to consider whilst in situ. It's also important to reflect on the sensory anxieties that people might feel prior to visiting. So for some people, the demands or anxieties of taking on board new sensory information can be overwhelming, and it can prevent access to an experience altogether. So recognizing this, and back onto the blue space theme now, we ran a very small initiative with Access Lizard Adventure down here in Cornwall, Sense, and sensory inclusion specialist Jo Grace. And we developed a sensory story to promote access to the unfamiliar sensations of watery landscapes and kayaking amongst people with complex disabilities. So in sensory stories, each sentence of the story is partnered with a rich sensory experience, and you might have 10 or so sensory experiences that make up the story. And they can be a really useful tool for creating access to nature-based experiences. And that's something that the Sensory Trust are now using in varied settings down here too. I've just put a screenshot of the story up on the screen there. The italicized bits are the sensory experiences that you're facilitating after reading the sentence. But these stories can really provide a chance to rehearse experiences and explore sensations that someone might otherwise feel challenging before they visit, and while they're at home in a safe and familiar space. And experiencing the sensory story in that way can help to orientate a person, enabling them to tune in their sensory systems and map out what will happen when they visit. Knowing what to expect can really help to alleviate anxieties and support someone to get more out of the nature experience when they do visit. And actually, after experiencing the story for a year or so, a group of kayakers who had never previously been on the water, not even got close to that type of environment, got out on the water with Access Lizard Adventure and various kind of supports, and had a really fab time. So that process was really important in shaping that. And that leads me on to intellectual access. And this is really linked to how the stories, histories, and ecologies of the different sites and nature more broadly, how these stories are crafted and shared in inclusive ways, signaling that people with diverse sensory and communication priorities are welcome and part of a setting's wider story. This is perhaps more relevant in nature settings where investments are made into interpretation, where that budget exists. Often interpretation relies on kind of written text and written interpretation boards, and they're not always fully accessible, and it can hinder full engagement by relying solely on the written word. And this is something that we've thought a lot about in the context of the Sensing Nature project and the work we've done since. And in part, it's about the formats in which information is made available. I put a few examples on the screen there, from tactile audio information to BSL, Makaton, Easy Read widget, perhaps sensory stories as well. But it's also thinking about how, when interpretation is fixed, it's important to reflect on where it's located. Is the clarity of the information affected by weather conditions, whether that's glare in bright light for visual materials, or perhaps audio materials that might be masked in strong wind? Is there a risk of encountering obstacles when you're trying to reach fixed signage? Are there signs that are located at head height, both for walkers and wheelchair users? And if people visit, are there volunteers or staff with the skills to share the site in an inclusive way, whether that's staff who are trained in sighted guiding and audio description, or staff with BSL skills, for example? And it goes beyond that too, because it's important to reflect on who is shaping, designing, and delivering the interpretation, to bring people whose experiences are seldom heard to the heart of the interpretation process. Indeed, how is anyone supposed to manage or interpret an experience they're not even aware of, because perhaps they don't tune into a place in that way? When considering disability in particular, there's a tendency to focus on visitor access, rooted in the aspiration to create accessible experiences for disabled visitors. And this narrow framing sometimes medicalizes disability, and it overlooks the role of disabled people as curators of experience, as potential site volunteers, storytellers, writers, communicators, education and visitor experience officers and managers, and I could go on. We explored this as part of a wider project that ran during the pandemic called Restoring Landscapes for Social Inclusion. And I won't go into the full project, but this part of it was a collaboration with Westonbirt, the National Arboretum in Gloucestershire, and Andy Shipley, visually impaired facilitator and sensory explorer. And through the project, we aim to explore new ways of bringing sight-impaired volunteers to the heart of visitor experience and interpretation activities at Westonbirt Arboretum. So during 2021, we recruited and trained 4 new visually impaired volunteers to join the existing volunteer guide team as VI guides and develop Sensing Nature walks. And each VI guide was paired with a sighted assistant and an assistant guide with responsibility for health and safety during the walks. And together, the guides have explored and enabled new multisensory ways of experiencing and sharing the widely celebrated qualities and histories of the Arboretum through the site's popular guided walks programme. And of course, Axel, Louisa's guide dog, was a key player, as well as Nikki, who is Mike's guide dog. The VI guides ran their first programme of sensory walks on site in autumn 2021 and went on to develop a new programme of sensory walks for 2022 and 2023. And Western Burt is now recruiting for more VI guides because the programme has been so popular. So through these walks, the guides have really been enticing visitors off the main paths to explore the rich textures and sounds and scents and sensations of the Arboretum. And you can read more about that if you would like to in the booklet that's linked to on the screen there. I'm sure the slides will be shared afterwards. But this process of embracing and embedding diverse experiences and perspectives and skills within the staff and volunteer base of a site can enhance the potential to identify and facilitate nature experiences that resonate amongst people with varied sensory, social and cultural backgrounds. I think our collaborator, Andy Shipley, articulated the importance of this really clearly when he said, I think the invitation to all of us is to explore and discover the diverse ways in which sites and habitats behave and express themselves, so we can work with them to reveal and share their unique and distinct stories, to delight and enchant all who encounter them. And efforts to do this are also really important from a social access perspective. In part, this is about ensuring that settings support a diverse range of activities and that activity programmes organised in these settings are open to all and supportive of varied interests and priorities. But it's also about addressing the lack of diversity within the environmental sector and creating a culture of inclusion across varied embodiments and social identities in the organisations who are involved in managing, interpreting and sustaining varied nature settings. Celebrating diversity in how sites are and have been managed, interpreted and experienced. And this may well involve acknowledging contested or hidden histories and their impacts on who feels part of a site story or otherwise. Some of the UK's most celebrated nature settings and landscapes foreground a relatively limited repertoire of stories. For example, we're very good at telling the story about the wealthy landowning family or the individual that instigated the creation of a particular parkland, country estate or botanic garden. But we're less good at recognising the stories of the foresters, the labourers and gardeners, those materially tasked with shaping and caring for those settings. And there's real value in broadening the narrative shared to speak to a greater diversity of landscape visitors, makers and shapers, to highlight that these are not just elite settings for a privileged few, recognising that intersecting social inequalities, for example, linked to gender, age, race, ethnicity, class, sexuality, can produce differentiated experiences of nature, health and well-being. And these are just some of the ideas we explored as part of our Arts and Humanities Research Council funded Unlocking Landscapes network with Dr. Claire Hickman from Newcastle University, where we really considered the role of sensory history in opening up new ways into these types of settings. Again, I won't go into it now, but you can find more about it in the website that's put on the screen there. And when thinking about social access, it's essential then to support the sharing of diverse stories about nature, what it is, and the many different ways in which it is or could be experienced. As noted by scholar Arthur Frank, people not only think about stories, far more consequentially, people think with stories. Being able to share and understand those stories fosters belonging and connection. And it's also important to broaden the stories shared about disability too, and who's sharing them. As argued by poet and non-fiction writer Dr. Polly Atkin, the way we talk about illness and disability dictates what is possible for all people who are affected by it. The narrative odds are too often stacked against disabled people. There are two options that seem to be available: triumphal recovery or inspirational death. There are too few stories of continuation, too few stories of joy, too few stories of millions of ordinary ways a disabled life may fold and unfold, like any life. Maybe if enough of us tell our own stories, we can change the narrative. We can write ourselves back in all our variousness, with our pain, our joy, our mundane everydayness, our truths. The more we address the identity-limiting norms, practices, and stories that shape how nature access is understood, enabled, or closed down, the more likely it is that embodied and social diversity across a whole range of nature settings will become both common and unremarkable, rather than exceptional or unusual. So just some concluding remarks. Access does reach far beyond proximity, presence, ramps and handrails, although they are of course essential. There's value in thinking and working creatively across physical, sensory, intellectual, social and historical domains of access. It's important to consider how to embed sensory, social and cultural diversity in the stories shared about and the experiences supported in and with nature. And I really can't emphasize enough the importance of collaboration and partnerships in this, making the unseen or rarely felt qualities of nature experience more compelling across varied backgrounds, histories and life circumstances. And I'll stop there, but thank you.
Brilliant, so fantastic! What a presentation! A huge amount of work, and we'll certainly be sharing all the slides because there's so many resources that people will want to access. And really nice overview of just the various different sensory aspects and access challenges. So thank you for that. And I thought the other thing that came through really strongly was the importance of storytelling. It's something me and Kyleigh were talking about a couple of weeks ago in terms of doing some evaluation around the Inclusive Beach programme. So thank you for that. And thanks everyone. I see some questions coming in, which is brilliant. So please continue to add those as we move on to our final speaker. So Alix Crawford is with us, who's the chairperson of the Mae Murray Foundation, and Kyleigh said a little bit by way of background and how the story started, but Alix, I'll hand over to you to give us a little bit of reflection on what you've heard so far.
Thanks, Ruth. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Alix Crawford. I'm the chairperson and the founder of Mae Murray Foundation. And can I just say it's my absolute pleasure to be here today. I'm really grateful to our hosts, Groundswell, Ruth and the organising team, and to our speakers for shining a light on the topic of inclusive urban green and blue spaces. It's a topic very close to my heart. And thank you to you for attending today and for your obvious interest in this important topic. Just sitting reflecting, it's just so wonderful to listen to the work being done. My daughter Talia is 24 now, and when she was born in '99, you know, you just didn't see any of this work happening then. Both Kyleigh and Sarah have told us how inclusion reaches far beyond physical access alone, and they've spoken passionately about the unnecessary barriers that many people are continuing to face when trying to enjoy time outdoors, the great outdoors, and we all know it's so important for our health and happiness. I'd like to echo what Sarah has said, in that I think sharing our learning is key to creating change. We have to remain open to new learning. These projects must stay under ongoing review, and we must learn from each other. I've learned so much already today from Sarah, and I can't wait to get back and put it all into practice. But I'd like just to reflect for a moment on what the impact is of being excluded, and share a bit of my own family's early experiences of exclusion, and hopefully offer you a bit of an insight into why it's so important to keep improving our urban green and blue spaces, keep listening to people with lived experience. There's no such thing as critical feedback. It's you know, we must keep asking for feedback, and we must keep building on learning. So Talia, my daughter, as a young infant, like most children, loved the park. She just loved the park. There was a park at the bottom of our road. Now, unfortunately, back in the day, there was only a swing that she could take part on. None of the other equipment was suitable for Talia. Talia is quadriplegic as a result of cerebral palsy. But she loved going to the park. I have to say as well, I mean, she just loved seeing the other children around her, even though they were a bit nervous about approaching her, and parents were certainly nervous about approaching us. Families will still tell us to this day that sometimes other parents or children get pulled away rather than engaging with someone that they see as potentially different. And that's just to do with exposure and visibility. And the more projects we have, as Kyleigh and Sarah have said, we'll see visibility, and things and attitudes will improve. So Talia loved nothing better than going to the park. Wanted to try everything, as I say, but other equipment wasn't suitable. But sadly, by the age of about 4, she couldn't fit in the swing anymore. Her legs had got tight, and we couldn't safely get her in and out of the swing. So we bought her a swing for home, and when she started school, she enjoyed the swing in the playground there. But Talia really wanted to go to the park at the bottom of the road and see the other children. And it was heartbreaking, because she didn't just want to go in and watch other children. There's no fun, as Sarah says, standing on the sidelines. She wanted to take part, and there was nothing that allowed her to physically do that. As I say, because the park was at the bottom of the road, we obviously passed it all the time. And Talia cried sore when we passed that park, and she would point and try to grab my attention and indicate that she wanted to go into the park. And it was very distressing trying to help her understand or try and divert attention to other things. And this actually continued for months. She was very determined that she wanted to go back to that park. And as heartbreaking as it was for me to listen to my baby cry, nothing actually prepared me for the day that she stopped. And I can still see her face in my rearview mirror, looking at the park and not crying and not pointing and not insisting, just looking at the park silently as we drove past, saying nothing. And that was my daughter accepting that she was excluded. Totally heartbreaking. So out of my control, regardless of who I phoned and what change I tried to make. It wasn't in time for my own daughter. So she missed out on a lot of childhood experiences. And a lot of the projects that you see happening at Mae Murray Foundation, or Inclusive Beach Programme. Again, Talia struggled with enjoying the beach. We're also working on play parks. We're working in loads of different areas, because now, 24 years on, there are still families being excluded. And the impact of that exclusion, it just knocks on. It knocks on to mental health, it knocks on physical health, it knocks on to the rest of the family. So never underestimate the impact that you can make by enabling just one person to enjoy our urban and green spaces. Now, thankfully, change is slowly happening. Lots of wonderful work happening. And Talia is quite the daredevil, and she's enjoyed loads of outdoor fun with activities with Mae Murray since we launched in 2016. She's been surfing, trekking, paddle boarding, tubing, to name but a few. She certainly is more adventurous than I ever was. And as Kyleigh mentioned earlier, our ADAPT framework, we are now working on guidance for fixed play parks, so that hopefully our children and our young adults into the future won't have to experience those barriers in play parks in particular. But there's other areas we're working on too. So just in closing, as I said earlier, and our speakers have underlined, working together is key. I'd encourage you all to ask questions, collaborate, partner. We've so much to learn from one another. Be open to learning and improving, and be ready to embrace and implement further change. Our spaces must be welcoming and easy to navigate for our diverse populations together. And I particularly loved listening to Sarah talking about diversity in all of its forms earlier. We talk about ourselves at Mae Murray Foundation about being an inclusive organisation and inclusion and lived experience led, and that's across the whole realm of areas where people are affected by exclusion. So thank you for your time, and we look forward to some questions. Thank you.
And thanks, Alix. A real powerful story, and just really inspiring what Mae Murray Foundation and yourself and Kyleigh as a formidable duo have done in a very short space of time with the Mae Murray Foundation. So it's fantastic to hear the story. Okay, thanks everybody. We've got some questions for for the panel, and we've got some time left, so feel free to bring those, to keep adding more. And if there's a point you particularly want to make, or a bit more of a discussion, please put your hand up as well, and Niamh will enable you to come in and join the discussion as well. So let me kick off. I think Kyleigh and Sarah, this one's maybe for both of you. So it's around, what is one of the most significant obstacles to making these spaces more inclusive and accessible? Is it around logistics, or challenges more associated with negotiating the physical characteristics of the space? So Kyleigh, do you want to go first, and then maybe Sarah and Alix can chip into that?
Yeah, I guess for the beach specifically, there are an awful lot of challenges and obstacles in the way. Some of the most common ones that we face are, because we take a partnership approach, we're a small organisation, so we split responsibilities between ourselves and beach operators, and often the biggest barrier is the staffing and the capacity to staff a beach, that responsibility does lie with the beach operator. So it's one of the biggest challenges that we face, but it's not possible to create an inclusive beach without that element. It's a high risk project, and there are so many checks that need to take place to ensure that those risks are mitigated. Another massive obstacle that we face are the attitudes of others, you know, whether that's the public or whether that's the beach operating staff, or whoever it is. There are just so many attitudinal barriers that we have to get over. You know, a lot of the time, whenever we're looking at creating a new project, no matter where it is or what environment it's in, people still look at cost first, and numbers of people that will benefit. And you know, that's a thing that really needs to go, that needs to disappear, because really it's about everyone being included, and no matter how many people are excluded, that's not okay. That whole family, that whole circle and community is excluded. So yeah, there are lots more obstacles. You know, it was mentioned about the logistical issues or the infrastructure. Yes, lack of changing places, toilets, parking, the access to the beach, the natural environment. They're all barriers, and the guide does discuss those. And some can be overcome and some can't. But attitudes can only be improved with visibility, and that's what everything we do is about, improving visibility of people of all ages and abilities within the community. So hopefully that answers that from our side.
Yeah, thanks, Kyleigh. And can you say, just you mentioned changing places, toilets. Can you just elaborate on what exactly that is?
Yeah, so not everyone can use a standard disabled toilet. There are people who need to use a change in places toilet, has a hoist, changing bench, has extra space for carers. There is a very specific template on the Changing Places website, which goes into the very specifics of the size and all of the equipment that's required. But it's essential to ensure dignified toileting. No one wants to get changed or toilet on a floor.
Thanks, great. Thanks, Kyleigh. Sarah, anything else you want to add on that specific question around challenges?
I mean, I think Kyleigh covered a lot there. I think, you know, just to echo, I suppose, well, there's two things. One, the barrier that gets cited every single time is that, oh, it's too expensive. We don't have the investment for that, and we don't have the staff capacity, and staff already overworked. And so again, it's just, okay, well, in that case, it's the same group of people who are going to continue to be excluded. And it's almost as if a financial justification makes that okay, rather than thinking creatively about maybe there's time to reprioritize or think about how to do things differently. I think the other one is sometimes you can have the most perfect accessible space, but as I think a comment in the Q&As come up, if you can't get the changes through inclusive transport or inclusive infrastructure, then people still can't get to it. So trying to get that kind of systems-based approach to access is very difficult. And I mean, just to echo, I think attitudes, I think there's a tendency to also do the classic, oh, that's too risky, we can't do that. And a blanket approach to risk across anybody who might potentially identify as disabled or someone with a long-term health condition, without really thinking about whether that judgment of risk makes sense. I remember in the Sensing Nature project, one of my participants who was sight impaired wanted to do a sponsored skydive, and it would have been in tandem with someone who's fully qualified for this. She didn't have to see to do the jump, but because she was sight impaired, they said no, it was too risky, you can't do it. And they didn't even think it through before saying no. So I think it's those sorts of things that are particularly challenging, really. I'll stop there. I could go on, but it'll turn into a rant.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And Alix, maybe just picking up on that a little bit. Both Kyleigh and Sarah mentioned about attitudes of others being a particular barrier. We've a question, one of the more recent ones coming in, saying, yeah, we can make these spaces and have equipment and provide beach equipment, but what else can we do, in your opinion, perhaps regarding education, increasing knowledge, etc., about the use of these spaces and around exclusion?
I think the emphasis just has to be on participation, you know, so obviously sorting access and having an equipment loan scheme is just part of the process. It's once we get onto the beach or into the forest or wherever it is, what are we doing then? So it's very much about people taking part. And so we try to encourage local authorities, if they're having a beach festival or some sort of festival on the beach or in one of our environments, then, you know, use the equipment that's there. The two should not run separately. You know, everybody should be included. So it's important to see all those activities happening. And once people are more visible, as Kyleigh says, then attitudes will start to change. But it's also about being, I think, innovative about initiatives to bring particularly young children into these environments, mixing with different people from diverse backgrounds, mixing at an early age so that it does become the norm. Certainly, you know, when Talia was young, I would rarely have met another wheelchair user or disabled child and their family out and about. So it's really about increasing visibility, and to do that, it can't just fall to the third sector or ourselves, like at Mae Murray Foundation. It has to be ingrained within community services and provision. So particularly local authorities should be thinking, how can we do that? And there's certainly been a move to do that, because we can see in Northern Ireland, a lot of local authorities are now having changing places toilets hired in at events, which is a great step forward. Not all of them are doing it. Some are also looking at their estate and saying, well, how can we change our estate to make sure that, you know, that these facilities are there? All of those things contribute to visibility, and so that parents and families and individuals can get out spontaneously as well in between the time when events are organised. But if we could just briefly as well touch on the risk end of things, and the recognising that this is a risky, particularly thinking about beach wheelchairs in the sea, it's a risky project. And we need people that are thinking of starting one of these projects really to understand and invest in, as Kyleigh says, in the staffing, because we want to learn year on year and make things better. And if people don't understand that there is value in that, then that is where we could maybe face bigger risks in terms of incidents further down the line. So we very much would advocate for the fact that getting the equipment and writing the processes, there's a lot in that. That's just the start of the journey. It's about then getting staff and capacity to build and to learn on that, and so that's how we'll keep our risk down. So yeah, very, very important just that it's valued moving forward.
Thanks, Alix. And that maybe picks up a little bit on a question from Celine, who's asked, are there specific kind of legal or regulatory challenges that you've encountered and how you've maybe overcome some of them?
We have had many challenges in terms of regulatory and legal. Everything that we do goes over and above regulations. So there are building regulations out there, there are minimum standards, but everything that we do is about going over and above that. So the answer is no, because as a minimum, those standards are always kept. But what we do is we look beyond access to participation and inclusion, and that's always going over and above your minimum standards.
Can I just maybe add on top of that, Ruth? I mean, we, as Kyleigh said earlier, you know, we look and assess which beaches we're going to move forward. And as she touched on, some beaches are not suitable for progressing to inclusive beach status. And sometimes those are beaches which have a lot of protection status around them. So perhaps, you know, pathways are going through sand dunes, and where we would need a firm structure and particular gradients, and we would need to make sure that that structure wouldn't move with sand dunes, that wouldn't sit with environmental regulations. So that's why some beaches have been discounted, and we haven't maybe taken forward just because of those regulations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And Sarah, anything you want to add on that particular question?
No, I think that's been pretty well covered.
Perfect. The next question is I think you all three of you kind of whetted our appetite a little bit when you kind of hinted at what's next and kind of future projects. So I wonder, Sarah, then maybe Kyleigh and Alix, if you could talk to us a little bit about new projects, ongoing efforts to make other natural spaces more accessible and inclusive. Sarah, do you want to start with that one?
Yes, great. Yeah, I guess in terms of my sort of research in this area, I'd like to flag, I'm not sure if she's still on the webinar, but Kate Morley is doing a PhD around urban nature and disability and social inclusion, and trying to think about how, you know, if efforts are being made to enhance the biodiversity across urban spaces, how can we make sure that cities and urban areas are for people and for nature, and that we don't necessarily presume that ecological protection is always at odds with access. I know, you know, in terms of the sand dunes, completely in that context, but sometimes, yeah, you can looking at inclusive ways of promoting biodiversity and access. I've just started a new project around climate adaptation and disability, and that's very much based on the recognition that if we are investing in our urban areas at the moment to become more climate resilient, then this is a fantastic opportunity to actually embed access and inclusion within that, and to ensure that disabled people are very much at the heart of climate action. So that's a 5-year project that's going on at the moment. And this isn't my project, but I just want to flag, and it's in no way supporting them, more trying to encourage people to respond. The Government Disability Unit currently has a consultation out on its Disability Action Plan for 23 to 24, and there's a whole section on it on inclusive playgrounds. It's open until I think the 6th of October, so I would just encourage people to respond to that consultation. There's also sections on climate mitigation and adaptation, but I just thought I'd flag it in case people want to make some of these points and highlight how we could be doing things a lot better. But I'll stop there and hand over.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sarah. Maybe if you could send us the link to that, we can put that in the email with all the presentations and other resources. Yeah, no, that sounds like a good opportunity. Kyleigh and Alix, do you want to say a little bit about what next for you guys?
Yeah, in terms of the ADAPT framework, we really see ourselves applying that to various other environments. As I've said before, we're a membership-led organisation, so our members kind of dictate what our priorities are. So they've kind of created our strategy for the next few years, and the things that we will definitely be covering with the ADAPT framework in the next couple of years are looking at the gym environment. How can a disabled person get into the gym and get active alongside everyone else, looking at an affordable solution to getting active. Then looking at events, one of the main problems most of our members face is not being able to take part in the local community, whether that's a music festival, a council run event. What we really want to do is apply the ADAPT framework to those instances, so that event organisers have a template to go by and guidance that they can use, that's coming directly from people with lived experience, who can say, well, we know that these are the barriers, and here are your solutions to get over those barriers. And then playgrounds by March next year, or Adapt My Play will be launched, and effectively that's applying the framework to outdoor playgrounds. And beyond that, we're also starting to look at other open spaces, you know, such as parks and other natural spaces in partnership with the National Trust and Woodland Trust. So there's other things in the pipeline, but the things I mentioned before are our priorities at the minute. Something else that our members, you know, are facing, which has been urgent for many years now, is the social care system that's collapsing around us. Families aren't getting enough support, respite, or opportunities, and disabled people aren't getting enough opportunities to take part, socialise and make friends. So we're looking for innovative solutions to try and address those barriers as well, and all of those are being led by our members.
Thanks, Kyleigh. You're busy. you've got lots going on. It's fantastic. Alix, anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think Kylie's covered it off well there. Thanks.
Brilliant. And maybe just again a question for all three. And Kyleigh, you touched on it a little bit in terms of, is there any work being done around kind of transport and accessibility and inclusion, and particularly if we see this as being part of actually being able to get to these spaces? Is there much work going on in that area?
Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Alix for this question.
Yeah. Just I see it in the questions there about transportation being crucial for increasing the independence of people. Absolutely, couldn't agree more. We have referred to transportation within our Adapt My Beach guide. There wasn't much time to focus on it today, but we've said very clearly that when we're looking at a site, connectivity is key. So it's how are you actually getting to the site? One of the main things that we were concerned about when we were looking at our sites in Northern Ireland is that the car park area is quite often just inundated if we get one of those rare days in the summer where it actually doesn't rain and the sun shines. So suddenly everyone just heads to the beach. So we've worked with our beach to have protected parking bays. So that's the first thing that if you're going to the trouble of driving to the beach on a really busy day and you've booked a wheelchair, a beach wheelchair under the loan scheme, that you're going to be able to get in and have a stress-free arrival by using the protected parking. In terms of the rest of the site, certainly in Northern Ireland, sometimes the site falls within local authority remit, and sometimes it's within the Department of Infrastructure or further afield. In terms of when things are under local authority, that's great because that's our partnership, and we can really make sure that access is good. And as I say, thinking about arriving by car in particular. If you're arriving by foot, we've again said that if for beaches that are located within easy connectivity to a local town or whatever, that access is key, and we've linked within our document actually to a really useful document from the Sensory Trust, which gives all the information that you need for there. In terms then of community public transport, quite a lot of our beaches in Northern Ireland aren't serviced by buses or trains, but where they are, it's certainly something that we're working on in the background. So TransLink We have been attending lots of consultations with TransLink. We've had a group of our youth panel actually go on the train and film the journey so that you know, people can see what you have to do, how you need to book, what to expect when you arrive at the train station, all of those sort of things. So we're trying to make that easier and trying to show people that it can be done, and to increase confidence for people to travel independently. But ultimately there are issues in Northern Ireland with transport. For example, our buses rarely can take more than one wheelchair, and that's a significant problem, particularly obviously for families that have more than one wheelchair user. Our community transport system, consultation is actually out on that shortly. I believe our community transport system, our members would tell us that it's really not fit for purpose, because at the minute our community transport in most areas isn't operating on the evenings and weekends. So we have several challenges that are outside of the remit of the site, for want of a better word, and we are in consultation with the Department of Infrastructure, IMTAC, who are the advisory committee to government, and local authorities in the background to do what we can to keep pushing that agenda. And our youth panel are particularly good at advocating for all of those things. But just to answer, you know, we would completely agree with the attendee that it's absolutely critical to get all these things joined up, and it's something that we do say in Adapt My Beach.
And thanks, Alex. I think there's a huge amount of work to do there around transport to these spaces. Sarah, a question for you. Does your research suggest that there are specific barriers to access across different social groups? And if so, what are these barriers and how could they be resolved?
I think it would be quite hard to sort of segment it out in that way. There's definitely, you know, there are certain barriers that will be experienced across many different groups. But I think I'm always quite reluctant to make big sweeping statements, because then you start to homogenize across groups by either impairment type or by social identity type. But I think it is worth being aware that, you know, a disabled person who also experiences inequalities or exclusion as a result of racism or classism, then you have multiple barriers that you're having to navigate. And so I think sometimes, you know, the idea that, well, we've put this program out there and no one's using it, they're just not coming, that often is a barrier in itself, because it's not recognizing the fact that actually certain groups have experienced so much exclusion from so many different angles that even if a program exists, if it hasn't thought about those wider aspects of exclusion, then it won't reach the people that it's trying to reach. I think sometimes as well there can be a tendency for people to think, okay, well, we've checked with, I'm going to be, you know, I'm making a generalization here, but you could say, oh, I've checked with a wheelchair user and I've checked with a long cane user and they've said it's accessible, so the site's fine. And actually, again, it's that thing of, you can't assume that just because you've checked with one person with a specific access need that it will then be accessible across all of those access needs. So yeah, I'm sorry, it's a long response to your question, and I can't give a clear answer because it's unfortunately very difficult just to segment out, this type of group will always have this barrier and this type of group will always have this barrier. I think it's just useful to be aware of the range of barriers that can exist and try to break down as many as possible. And as Alex said, just keep learning as we go. Don't presume that you've done everything and that's job done, because there'll always be things that we're not aware of that we can only just keep trying to improve.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate that's not a particularly easy question to answer. So thank you for that. We've got a few minutes left, and I hope Sarah, Alex, and Kyleigh, you can see the questions that are coming in, and you'll see there's a lot of support from Therese, David, Cindy, and Jean for a lot of your work. And Cindy makes a very good point there as well about the difficulty of rural living, and I think Alix, just following up on your point around access to these spaces, and if you're living in a rural area. So I just wanted to finish by asking you all the same question, which is, you're largely speaking to a group of researchers. So now's a good time to tell us where the gaps are, and how we can be useful really to support the great work that you're all doing. So Alix, maybe if I could start with you, where do you think are some of the kind of key gaps that you think need filled, that a group of researchers that we have within Groundswell could help support?
Thanks, Ruth. I would love to look at some some of our main tourist destinations, because those are the places where really people want to visit, people at home as well as visiting tourists. A lot of them, we have a beautiful areas here in Northern Ireland, and I think there's a lot more could be done to look at specific tourist attractions. Now, I know Kyleigh has been out actually even just in recent weeks looking at some of those, but I think from a research perspective, it would really add weight behind what we're trying to do. And I think it's very important that research and lived experience continue this journey of co-production and linking, because our voice is quite low at times, and we're not, I suppose, best placed to, we can certainly show the lived experience, but there is so much, I suppose, knowledge that you can bring behind, and really help us to show clearly the benefits of changing these spaces and inclusion. So I think I would just say, let's be ambitious and let's work in co-production. I'd also just like to pick briefly up on Cindy's point about rural living. That's another area I think is really, really important, and it's something that Kyleigh and I have been working on recently, because when we look at our Inclusive Beach project, those won't always be suitable for small, maybe rural coastal areas. And just to say, Cindy, that we have another project that we don't talk about today, but we would love if you would get in touch, because there are things that we're doing there, and the more lived experience that we can have feeding into to those projects, the better. So we would just reach out to Cindy to say we would love a discussion around some of the things that you've mentioned, and rural living in particular.
Thanks, Alix, and we can certainly put you in touch with Cindy. Kyleigh, do you want to add anything to that and you want to put in your wish list?
You hear my wish list quite often, Ruth.
Yeah.
Okay, in terms of as a small organization, we're heavily reliant on the voices of our lived experience members, which is crucial. So I guess it's just, whenever when we're looking for funding, or when we're trying to pitch a project, there are not many statistics out there for disability in Northern Ireland, and we're very much reliant on the voice of our membership, which is growing every day, and that's fantastic. But university-led research always adds a bit more weight to any proposals that we can put forward.
Thanks, Kyleigh. And Sarah, last word to you. Where's the next research opportunities, you think?
Oh, I've got a long list, but to pick out, I suppose, a couple of, I think, priority areas. I think often in research, we prioritize the experiences of people who can articulate their experiences and needs in words. And that means that there are many disabled people who don't use words to express themselves, whose experiences are not being captured in research at the moment, and not just relying on proxies to understand what their experiences and priorities are. So I think that's a big area, and especially in relation to blue spaces, there's very little done there. I think another one is just thinking about those people who do experience multiple aspects of inequality. I think there is often in the work done around disability and nature access, you tend to recruit more people who identify as white. And so there is a big gap there in terms of understanding the experience of ethnic minorities, and that kind of area is really important. And then the only other thing I would say is just to emphasize that rural, and I know that Groundswell is about the urban, but I think there are really specific barriers in rural areas, and trying to think creatively about how we can address some of those transport barriers, but also some of those tensions between trying to protect ecologically sensitive or historically sensitive environments, whilst also not closing down opportunities to open up access. I'll stop there.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. And I do think that rural aspect is a huge gap that we should look to do something to address within Groundswell. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you still hanging on an hour and a half later. We're just a couple of minutes before 3:30, and I guess you have all various places to run to at 3:30. So we've got a couple of minutes to get there, whether it's virtually or in person. I just want to say a big thanks to Kyleigh, Alix, and Sarah for 3 fantastic speakers, and we've all learned a huge amount from you all. So thank you for taking up your time and sharing your knowledge and your learning so generously. And thanks to all the audience as well for the great questions. And please do share the various links and presentations. We'll do a follow-up email with all of those, and if anybody else wants to add any links, etc., to that, send them through to myself or Niamh, and we'll make sure to add those to the list. And we'll also share the recording for this as well. So I'll just bring it to a close there and just say thanks again to everyone, and particularly our 3 speakers, and we'll catch you all again soon at our next webinar. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.